Hi, welcome back. One last time for today, the Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Europe Live with me, Christopher Ludwig. We've come to the end of this 2 days packed full of content, interviews, presentations, data on the developments in the European automotive supply chain. And I hope you'll agree we've had a lot to take away so far in terms of talking through the many challenges that you're aware of, but also the opportunities, again, whether it's in electrification, sustainability, digitalization, but of course, also in managing through the current supply chain disruptions that many of us are facing in the wake of COVID, be it material and computer chip shortages, and much more beside. But rather than go through those in detail, I think what I would note is that threaded through all of these issues, and especially the recommendations for solutions around them, it comes down to supply chain partnerships, relationships, and skills. And when we talk to the decision makers and the stakeholders involved, I think we're seeing a real evolution in all of these areas, whether it's the logistics and supply chain organizations at OEMs and major tier suppliers, whether it's a changing of responsibilities between manufacturer, 3PL, 4PL, carrier, technology provider, or integrating more functions, mostly with a view to get better visibility of planning and operations, and of course to better chart the changes ahead. These are things that have come up in virtually every session that we've had throughout this event, and it's partly on that note that we want to close out this event and put this in a bit more detail to some major supply chain leaders here in Europe and indeed globally. And that's why I'm pleased to welcome and bring onto screen with me Martin Corner, who's head of global supply chain management division at Volvo Cars, a role that in fact integrates planning and operations for inbound, outbound, and service parts globally, and Hans Cremer, who's senior manager for supply chain purchasing at Toyota Modal Europe, helping to lead a team responsible for logistics purchasing for inbound, vehicle, and service parts. And Hans, of course, we spoke to Hans's colleague earlier this morning, Leon, who's heading the logistics division. So we get a great opportunity here to carry on through some of that in the context of partnerships. Welcome, Martin and Hans. Great to have you with us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Great. Well, I kind of wanted to start on the topic of supply chain organizations and how they're evolving at your respective companies. As I kind of alluded to right there in the intro, there have been some changes with Volvo integrating some functions, and also recently some further adjustments as well, and also with Toyota. But maybe I can get you to just tell us a little bit more about that and the objectives. Martin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, a lot of change. I think I said previously when we discussed that when I joined in September 2019, my remit at the time was a global scope, but it was inbound and outbound logistics only. And pretty much it was an evolution of the insourcing of the whole logistics operation that only really started 2012, 2013 for Volvo Cars. When Volvo Cars has gone through this huge growth curve, both in terms of volume and scope, and also from a global footprint. And in the time I've been here, really, we integrated the aftermarket logistics, or part supply and logistics as we call it, into my organization last year, around April timing. We also created what I would call a proper logistics engineering function, and created a truly global team where we had the people in the regions reporting through to a global head by commodity. So that was a lot of transformation in itself. And then Volvo Cars overall has been going through rationalization in all of its business divisions, and basically things are being put into clusters that are combined. So amongst a sort of combined sales cluster, there was a creation of my boss's job, which is now called Industrial Operations and Quality, and effectively that's 4 big business units, which is supply chain management, manufacturing, procurement, and quality. And to add to my scope, as of March 1st this year, we've got the full operations planning side of the job as well. So what I think is really great is now I would say we've got a really fully integrated supply chain management function in one place. All of the logistics, inbound, outbound, finished vehicles, and the aftermarket, as well as the actual planning functionality, so connecting the commercial needs to the industrial side of the business. And I think procurement joined this cluster last year as well. And I think that was really important. So we've now got an end-to-end value chain organization, and I would say a true, fully scoped global supply chain management organization that's within that value chain cluster. So it's quite exciting, and there's a lot of transformation to come.
Great. Now I'm going to probably pick up on a few of those points, but Hans, I wanted to turn to you. Obviously, as I mentioned, you have responsibility on the logistics purchasing side, so obviously some differentiation from Leon van der Merwe that we heard from this morning. But tell us a little bit about your organization and how it's changed, and again, what some of the objectives are there.
Yeah, indeed. So as you pointed out, Leon van der Merwe this morning explained the integration of the operational side of the logistics, where the responsibility for the different networks is now in one function. And actually, in parallel, we've also changed the purchasing responsibility related to those three logistics networks in a similar way, which means that that responsibility was kind of scattered around the company, and we have now brought that together in one logistics purchasing team. And really, the purpose of doing that is to, first of all, create a segregation of duties between the operations on the one hand and the purchasing function on the other hand. But another purpose, and I think that's probably the most important one, is to standardize the approach that we use in purchasing logistics services. So what that means is that before we were actually doing many different approaches in how we bought logistics. On the one hand, we were doing a very high degree of tendering in some areas of the business, and then there were other areas of the business where the purchasing role was, maybe not so easy to accommodate on top of the operational workload of the members. But we are now standardizing one approach, which is the same approach as what we use with our parts suppliers. And that means that we are focusing on creating long-term partnership with suppliers. So generating cost reduction, not so much through regular tendering, but through yearly fact-based cost discussions with our logistic partners, which doesn't mean we never tender. We keep an open door approach. If we find good solutions on the market that we think are sustainable, we can do that. But the key focus is to create those long-term partnerships with our logistic partners.
And I think that's something key that I'm going to come back to you on in a moment. But before we do, maybe Martin, just another point on that sales and operations planning piece, because it's to me quite an interesting and important integration. And other OEMs are going or trying this path. Perhaps the automotive industry has traditionally had that somewhat more separate. What are some of the other, to make that really effective, what are some of the other sort of, let's say, medium to long-term changes that need to happen, be it from a systems point of view and other integration, to really see that come to fruition?
It's a great question. What I would say is, at the moment we have, let's say the heritage of operations planning has been, let's just make sure we can meet the sales demand with an industrial response. Obviously, there's a significant amount of complexity in the process in terms of lead times, parts complexity, market share ability of the vehicles. But we try and optimize, and we steer, I would say, in a relatively short-term horizon. And I think the longer-term strategy in this area, I would like to go from being a sort of a reactive process function to becoming a really intelligent business steering function. And I really truly believe the sales and operations planning process and functionality, it should be the heart of any automotive company. It should be connecting all the dots between the short, medium, and long-range ambitions of the business, and connecting both the capacity in our plants, the capacity in the supply base, and also doing the what-if scenarios and the business steering both on stock, profit, sales channels, and driving some of the capacity and industrial strategy decisions. And I see the sales and operations planning being at the center or the heartbeat of all of it. So we're at the very start of, I think, that process. But from a systems and process development perspective, I think we've got huge steps to take. And I think the first thing, though, is really focusing on, is our process matching our ambitions? And probably we'll discuss this a bit later, but more online sales. I think we need to have more market share ability for BEVs, for example, in the future, to give us a better way to optimize the pipeline on a, let's say, a potentially growing segment with resources and capacity that's going to be hard to compete for. So I think like anything, and I've said this before, systems is something where we have to make that call of, do we decide our own process that we believe is fit for purpose for Volvo Cars and then design a system ourselves to execute that? Or do we think a bit smarter and understand, is there excellence in processes and systems somewhere else that we can integrate and maybe adapt slightly? And that might be a smarter approach. And probably not just from the car industry, but from other sectors as well. You know, we've said before, again, that lots of other industries, their whole business model is a supply chain effectively. And they're much more advanced in some of these tools, particularly in terms of predictive analysis. I know that's been a theme through the last couple of days, reactive to predictive supply chains. So systems-wise, I don't have an answer. I know there's lots of S&OP tools on the market, but I think first things first is we need to establish what we want to be as a function, the process we think we need, integrating all of the other functions we work with, sales planning, marketing, finance, industrial operations, and then really say, okay, how do we execute that in a smart way with the use of tools and systems? So it's exciting times, but a big journey ahead of us.
No question about that. And Hans, I want to pick up on something you mentioned there on partnership when we talk about the objectives for this purchasing. Now, because I wanted to say, we might initially say, well, we'll combine the purchasing so that we get better scale and can drive the price down or something like, that might be a kind of expectation, if you like, of what the objective is. And I'm not saying that it may not sit there where possible, but it sounds to me that that's actually not the main reason here. And is this something of a shift as well for, as you alluded to building, or at least making those officializing those partnerships more in the purchasing process?
Yes, I think in setting up this organization and this approach to our partner base, I think there are three main benefits that we see. And I think the first one, it's not so much cost related, but it's mainly related to performance. Because as Toyota, we know that we are sometimes not acting in exactly the same way as the rest of the industry. We have our special processes and procedures, which our logistic partners need to be familiar with if they want to be very successful inside Toyota. And on top of that, we also have our particular way of solving problems. We call that Toyota Business Practices, or TBP. It's closely linked to TPS. And we see some benefit of developing our partners in that way of problem solving. So for that reason, we are spending time and resources on making such a development available. So just to give one example, we've actually recently introduced a first logistic partner also into our Pan-European Supplier Association, which is bringing together many part suppliers to share best practices in terms of problem solving and so on. So we believe that's absolutely key to guarantee good performance. And if we're making all those efforts, obviously, it doesn't make sense to do very regular tendering. We'd better stick with the partners that are able to deliver the performance that is required in the business. So for us, that's the main benefit. Obviously, from a cost point of view, we do also expect some benefits of our approach, but it's not so much. But to some extent it is, but it's not so much linked to economies of scale, but it's more linked to the approach that we're taking of having yearly open and fair cost discussions with our partner base rather than relying on tendering, because we simply believe that tendering will allow you to follow the market, but that doesn't necessarily generate the best costs. I think we had a very interesting session on what is happening in the container shipping world right now. If you organize a tender today on container shipping, you're not going to be very happy with the price. But if you have a long-term relationship with your partner, you're probably in a better position to try and mitigate that type of impact. And I think that the final benefit that we see coming from this longer-term relationship approach is very much linked to innovation, where, and it's very similar to what Martin just explained as well, we need our partners to contribute to that. So they need to know what is very specific in Toyota, how our business is working, in order to be able to support us in innovating the business.
And it will be key, and I think we're going to touch on some of that, especially when we talk about achieving some sustainability goals and what we may need from the supplier and logistics carrier base. The only way for them to be able to make some of those investments, I think, is going to be with some deep partnership and stable kind of forward plans of what's coming. Maybe a last point just to share with you both on the organization as such, since Martin, you, as you mentioned, fairly recently, I think a year ago, integrated the service parts, the aftermarket side. This is obviously also fairly new for Toyota. And again, maybe Martin, can you share with us any of the benefits there, or what you kind of hope to achieve there? Because obviously, again, we're not talking about services and networks that just overlap directly. It's I gather the benefits are a bit different to that.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, because I'd say we're still very much in the infancy of that journey. And being truthful, it was quite a disruptive activity for the people who worked in the aftermarket logistics division, because they felt very close affinity to the customer service business, and they wanted to be close to the markets, and they wanted to be close to the commercial side. And I think the people aspect of it, we've really had to take care of. But what I'd say we're finding is the benefits come on the people side of it, because in the context of what I said earlier, we've now got one function, basically, which is the glue between the industrial and the commercial systems of the company, and that's supply chain management. And we can say, we can drive synergies, we can manage people's careers on a longer horizon, we can share skills and best practice, and we do see clear synergies. And I think what we're realizing is, at the end of the day, a warehouse that we use in the aftermarket business is very different to the inbound network in functionality and process. But excuse me. But in terms of the best practice and what's the future of the warehouse 4.0 or whatever you want to call it, a lot of that is common in terms of, let's call it hardware development, in terms of the equipment in the warehouse, the systems we could use, sort of how we do lean process design in the flow within the warehouse, very common. The parts logistics moving in and out of those warehouses, very common and the same. And even you could say that for me, the unique selling point of that division is the planning of the materials supply into the commercial business model, and the availability of the right parts, and using business intelligence and artificial intelligence to do predictive forecasting of those materials. That's where we get the real bang for the buck. But I could also spin that around and say, those are the same principles we need to start applying to the S&OP process for the finished vehicles and the inbound parts. Predictive, innovative systems and solutions. So I see a lot of overlap and synergy, both in the skill sets for our people, and also I think the longevity of feeling we work for a big division, we contribute massively to this company, and we're motivated by that, and we can see what we're trying to achieve. So I think it's a start of a good journey, and I think we need to show that we need to stop thinking manufacturing and sales, and we need to start thinking business specialism and broad clusters where we really get synergy and expertise pulled together.
And Hans, from your point of view, you mentioned already, obviously, the key objective around standardizing processes, and obviously that will help build and form those relationships, and I'm sure also benchmark across the company. But in terms of this specific aspect of the service parts in relation to finished vehicle or inbound, again, do you have some early learnings or reflections on how that's going and what you want to achieve there?
Yes, I think the early learning from that is, as I mentioned before, we've used completely different methods of purchasing in all those different areas, and I believe that the long-term partnership model that I've explained before, in my view, it's probably easier to integrate into the production parts and the service parts areas than it would be in the vehicle logistics area, where actually a lot of the business is driven also by backflow from different customers, and that creates some kind of dynamic in the relation where actually partners are kind of used to having regular tenders and combining and kind of marrying the flows from the different OEMs, and therefore be able to make a competitive proposal. So I think this is one of the difficulties that we face, that maybe this model may not be as natural in vehicle logistics as would be in production parts as service parts.
So I wanted to pick up a little bit more on let's say coming out of this disruption, or maybe not quite out of it yet, but looking at some of the disruption that we've been facing. And does it make you, do you reflect and feel that stakeholders in this challenge, whether semiconductor, container, etc., should be working together differently to avoid this in future? And Hans, you've already made a good point, I think, on what would happen if you just took the tendering approach today, and the limits of that. But are there other aspects too to that partnership that you really think will serve Toyota, Volvo well in the future? And I'm going to start with you again there, Hans, and then we'll go from Martin.
Yeah, I think the disruptions that we've seen over the last 12 months, for me, they've really been a proof of concept of the long-term partnership model, because what we've seen is that those companies with which we already have that type of deep relationship and that long history, they've been absolutely amazing in supporting the business in terms of providing the flexibility to scale up some resources at short term when required, or to scale down, putting members on furlough based on discussion with us in order to protect the entire supply chain from cost impact. And we've seen that went quite smoothly. So in that sense, those partners have not added to the disruption that we were already facing. But of course, we have faced disruptions also in some areas just coming from the logistic partners. But we've seen that is more with partners where the relationship is not that strong. They maybe did not fully understand how we operate and what are the needs. So in that sense, it's actually a confirmation of that model, and it's actually driving us to do more of that rather than less in the future.
Martin, would you add anything more to that?
Yeah, maybe slightly. I mean, I fully echo Hans's comments in relation to logistics strategic partnerships. It's something I 100% believe in as well. But in terms of bigger picture and the supply chain challenges we faced, I think now more than ever, it's finally kicked the automotive industry up the backside, if you excuse my crude language. And I read the article in Automotive Logistics a week or so ago. I think it was the CEO of NXP saying that our sort of long-standing, decades-old, just-in-time supply chains, we might need to look ourselves in the mirror and recognize that actually now we want, particularly Volvo Cars, we want to exponentially grow on the back of new technologies, and particularly technologies that are not just the old mechanical parts that only were made by automotive first, second, third, fourth tier suppliers who we could kick around and bully. Now we're competing with software companies and technology companies and Apple and people who make flat screen TVs, smart TVs. We're in a different world, and we've been, I think, a little bit exposed by our sort of one-dimensional, lean, just-in-time supply chains. And I think the broader aspect of this integrated planning and smart value chain configuration, where maybe we take a different approach to how we supply and manage different part families, needs to happen. I think it's been said at different points through the last couple of days, the value of proper supply chain illumination, data and tools through all the tiers. I mean, the semiconductor crisis has exposed this perfectly, is crucial for the supply chain. And also linking back to what Hans is saying about strategic partnerships, I think it goes for part suppliers, OEMs, logistics companies to really have that longer term shared volume plan and vision and a joint approach to securing the full value chain on a longer horizon. So I think it's for me, it's we can see this like football in Europe right now. This is an opportunity to actually say there's a potential tipping point for us to do something different. And do we grasp that? Or do we fall back into old habits when the short-term problem disappears? I hope we grasp it. And Chris mentioned this earlier, and I think this is something people like me and Hans can work together, this collaboration aspect. And when we talk about backflows and logistics network design, provided we don't compromise competition law, we keep talking about it, but somewhere we've got to start working together a little bit with our logistics networks and take waste out the system. I'm sure you want to ask about sustainability later, but that is a big driver of sustainability, empty miles caused by competition, which again is another thing I've been saying for a while, and I need to try and do something about it with my colleagues.
Indeed, and well, I mean, as long as we're not announcing here a Volvo Toyota breakaway into to a super league of European OEMs, but then take the rest with you. I think hopefully, we can reform from within and be quite fruitful in that way. But yes, excellent points on both sides there. Let's pick up on that sustainability point, actually. Obviously, it's something that's coming across the event. From the goals have been shared by many manufacturers. Path to net carbon zero. I mentioned earlier today the European, obviously the regulations, the Parliament and Commission agreement, even earlier this morning. So everything is going in this direction. I'm just, Hans, I want to start with you from a kind of logistics purchasing and decision point of view. How are you at this point factoring in, or are you factoring in logistics emissions, or might you soon start to do that on decisions or on KPIs and building that into the standard process? You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I think Leon also shortly hinted on that this morning. So in our review, of course, you can look at intermodal solutions, you can look at alternative fuels and many things, but probably the best way to reduce CO2 emissions is by not running the kilometers at all. So to that end, what we are doing at the moment when we make part sourcing decisions, we are factoring in the CO2 impact in those decisions. So very practically what we do is we quantify in a euro value the emissions that will come from logistics, from the transport, from the supplier side to our factory, and that's part of the total cost of ownership based on which we make the decision. So naturally, that will bias suppliers that are closer to our manufacturing plants to be more competitive.
Indeed, so playing a bigger role in those overall purchasing decisions, and Martin, similar for Volvo, in terms of how you're factoring in or might factor in this picture into purchasing decisions.
Yeah, it's exactly the same in Volvo. It's a challenge though, and I think monetizing it, or the sustainability aspect, how do we align that with a monetary sourcing decision it continues to be a challenge. I mean, what I would say, as you're all aware, our CEO is very, I'd say, aggressively visionary, and I mean that in a very positive way. And he's made a firm commitment that sustainability will be as much a part of Volvo's core values and brand as safety has been in the past. And the problem I feel is that the sourcing footprint is everything, as Hans has exactly said. And as we all know, that's the other disease of the success of our global supply chains in the past, is we've got a very spread out footprint. And unfortunately, the more volume we have on the current footprint, the bigger the CO2 output. So whilst I would say the suppliers from a manufacturing perspective and our business from a manufacturing perspective have got really exceptionally aggressive plans. I think our plant in Daiqing is already carbon neutral. Don't quote me on that one, even though I've said it to a public audience, but very close to being carbon neutral already with, circular economy and recycled materials. And unfortunately, logistics CO2 mass output is growing as our volume grows. So we could, as Hans said, we're playing a small tune in terms of modality, trying to introduce biofuels, which we've done on our inbound network in the Nordics. We're going big on circular economy in our warehouses, but in the end, the miles are the whole thing. So I think a rethink again of how sourcing footprints are decided, maybe putting more investment in tooling and localization for a greater good longer term on the life cycle, sustainability and logistics cost and inventory reduction. They're all the dynamics and challenges we're facing right now. But it's a firm commitment, so we have to find a solution to it very fast, ultimately.
Yes, and we heard in an earlier session today from BMW talking about here how if they didn't mitigate some of the effects from the battery, for example, that the carbon footprint emission from production logistics would effectively skyrocket. And actually, That's something Volvo and Geely and have been quite upfront about as well in terms of needing to address that. So that all sort of feed into this. Do you see sustainability targets shifting a larger share of freight onto multimodal transport? I mean, it's sort of an obvious thing to some extent, but obviously it's easier to say than to just do in a mass way. So in effect, do you see, that both multimodal as well as a technological solution like electrification, will both be sharing equal weight, or in effect, is there only so much we can really do with multimodal? I'll start with you there, Martin.
Yeah, I think there is only so much we can do. In a way, it's a simple answer. Of course, we're pushing it hard, and we've had some great success, both from vessel and train, sort of interconnected highways that we've created both in Europe and actually from an east-west passageway, but that's becoming more challenging. But I think, as Hans and myself said on the last question, it only goes so far. It's the distances traveled that ultimately, until we design some form of teleportation machine or we digitally print parts on site, it's a challenge. It's the miles or kilometers traveled that's the problem. And yeah, battery cells is a nightmare. I probably said before, I think we wait out the truck when it's about 25% full. So you increment that by every kilometer those cells have got to travel to the point of the battery pack construction. It's not nice at all when you look at the forward projection.
Absolutely. And Hans, when you're working with partners there, I mean, do you see modal shift as playing, as you say, kind of a bigger role in those decisions, or again, maybe looking more to where the technology will play a role?
Well, I think in the end, in order to be sustainable, we're going to need a mix of solutions, and kilometer reduction is one of the let's say big targets. Modal shift is another one. Alternative fuels is a third one, and there are many technological solutions on the horizon to be able to manage the network in a better way. And I think at the moment, based on the visibility that we have, it's very difficult to predict which one of those solutions is going to be the dominant solution, or is going to be the future standard. But in my view, that's probably what we need to aim at as an industry, to see what are those technologies that in the future are going to be the new standard, and where does it make sense to invest, and which technologies are maybe nice to have, or maybe are kind of a buzz, let's say, at the moment, but that will maybe not materialize into some solutions that bring a benefit in the long term.
And as we sort of alluded to before with the partnership, and I kind of said, if we think alternative fuels or electric trucks in the medium longer term have a big role to play, then there's yet more capital investment that's required, and in a transition that is already costing a lot of capital, and capital that will be hard to come by in every place. So I guess I'm partly answering my question here with the partnership, but how do you see those discussions and plans being, I would say, co-formed with your partners? And maybe I'll turn it back to you there first again, Hans.
Well, I think the first point to say there is that we need to decide on what is the technology that we invest in, and where do we, in which basket do we put our eggs. And I believe that the logistic partners, they do play a key role there, because as Toyota, we are a small player in the logistics market. We may be globally one of the larger car makers, but when it comes to logistics, we are having a limited spend in the bigger scheme of things. Plus, we also don't have visibility, or not such a big visibility, on what other sectors are doing. And I think that's a key asset that the logistic partners do have. They have wider exposure to the market. They have knowledge of what is happening in other sectors. So I think the key there is that our partners need to drive the innovation in our organization. They need to tell us which ideas will work for our business model and which ones will not work. So I think they have a key role in initiating the different innovation. And then, as I said before, in terms of how to how to agree on investments going forward and how to decide where to invest. I think that long-term partnership indeed is important. If you have a business horizon of 2 to 3 years, probably it's very hard to decide on very large investment in new type of equipment or new IT systems. If you have a longer term perspective, that's probably easier to digest.
Indeed. Would you add anything to that, Martin?
No, I think it's a great answer. Maybe the only slight thing I would add is there's probably a shared investment need based on, as Hans says, some form of longer term arrangement. And it's maybe not just the logistics partners, but local governments, local authorities, maybe even the EU. I know there's been a few discussions about lobbying and the industry getting its act together to create corridors and structural investment that we share somehow as a shared vision. And I think that's the only thing I would add to what Hans said, which was a perfectly excellent answer.
Agreed, and I think it is a good point on the government role there. And in fact, as a sort of side note, our team has been doing some work together with ECG on understanding, for example, some of the funding mechanisms that will come from Brussels when you think about Horizon Europe or the common or different freight corridors. Where can some of this support and help logistics, in this case vehicle logistics, but there are many areas we need to keep in mind for that as well. We've got maybe just a couple minutes more. I know I've taken a bit more time than we promised, but it's just I always take advantage of this where I can. Martin, I want to ask you something specific to Volvo, and then I'll ask a question, because since we've last been on screen together, let's say, Volvo has come out much more forcefully or clearly to say online sales only for EV and online sales for everything, therefore by 2030. Not that the dealers are going away per se, but the role is changing, and that's obviously committed to. And you alluded to it in the sales and operations side, but just any other things you'd want to point to from a logistics process systems that you're going to need your partners to come with you on in this journey?
Yeah, I think the whole dynamic is going to change in terms of the expectations from the customer. So Volvo outwardly, and it's another ambition of our CEOs, push very much that we'll become an online electrified company offering very, let's call it, short lead times and fast deliveries to the consumer. So from a logistics network perspective, we need to really look at our pipeline and where we have, let's call it, smart stock. And in an ideal world, that stock will also be shareable to multiple markets, so it makes the pipeline more agile. So that when it comes to the logistics side, let's say in the future we have a retailer that's ordering a car for somewhere in Germany and a B2C customer's ordering a car online. How do they get the instant delivery and service level they need? And then also, I think it's also the transition and the handover of the car to the final customer, which is going to change. So if we're committing to a really short transaction and delivery time, it really changes the whole business model. And last time I talked about like multi-speed, omni-channel pipelines and networks. I think we're going to have to do really highly integrated planning solutions so that if we want to send cars down a fast pipeline, we have a solution for that and it's affordable, rather than today's method where we have sort of a hub and spoke style where we push cars into a market compound. We have a sort of cadence of deliveries, and we know that every 4 days a truck can come and fill up for that region of zip codes. That's going to change. And we either pay a premium for that or we design a really smart integrated solution which combines the planning and the logistics network, which is what we're planning towards, as you may guess from my answer. But it's going to be quite exciting because we were in a recent strategic dialogue with a cross-functional senior leadership teams, and our CEO went from saying, I proposed something where I said we could get a car ready for handover to the customer from the point of order within about 8 days, which I thought was super ambitious and based on a lot of ambitious principles in the end-to-end pipeline. And in his sum up, he turned that into a week and then 2 days, and then it became instant by the time he'd finished his sum up. So whatever instant means, I don't know. But no, there's a real push that we create a fantastic consumer experience today that's more aligned to buying something online from Amazon. And I guess we know it's totally different industries, but that's the expectation of what we need to deliver. So massively exciting, but really transformational, in fact.
Well, and well done to Håkon Samuelson for removing 8 days in order to delivery.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Just within a minute of a meeting. That's great.
Yeah.
Let's conclude here with the last question. So much of what we're talking about requires, as mentioned, new relationships, but also new skills development within our teams and in our partners. So what would you identify as perhaps the most important skill that automotive logistics experts, leaders in Europe need to let's say improve or develop to be successful over this coming decade? And I'll turn to you, Hans, to start.
Yes, I think for me the main skill is really creativity, because there's really a very large amount of different technological options available at the moment, and we don't really know yet on each one of those technologies how they're going to support our business. And I think that's where, both on the OEM side and on the logistic partner side, we need to be creative to try and turn those technologies into practical solutions that will help us in the business.
Excellent. And Martin, from your side?
Yeah, I think pretty much the same answer. I think the skill will move from being process experts to becoming solution finders. So that creativity, being people who are not scared of finding new ways of doing things and adapting to the changes as they go along. It's a cliche where people are scared of change, but I really see that it's going to be a period of, the VUCA world. Things are going to constantly adapt, and we're going to have to constantly move to the business needs. And people need to be, I'd say the curiosity point is perfect. And then also people who are solution orientated would be my message. Excellent.
Well, I want to thank you both for this time and input. What I love about this discussion is not only did we get a sense of where we're going, but it really automotive logistics supply chain is really exciting right now, and I think will become even more. And you've both really illustrate that in clear ways. And I think, and I'm sure our audience feels the same out of that, and we'll be excited to go on this journey with you, and because we certainly are at automotive logistics. So Hans, Martin, thank you so much for sharing with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for the opportunity.